Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett, and in this bulletin we've got a roundup of stories developing all around the world. First, the headlines. India achieves the landmark of 1 billion COVID vaccine doses administered. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulates the nation and pays gratitude to healthcare workers. Authorities in China cancel hundreds of flights, close schools and ramp up mass testing in an attempt to stamp out a new COVID-19 outbreak linked to a group of tourists. Russia asks the Taliban to safeguard human rights. At the Moscow Format Summit, the new rulers of Afghanistan insist its government is already inclusive and says the ISIS threat is overestimated. Netflix employees join protesters outside their Los Angeles office, angry over a new Dave Chappelle comedy special that sparked accusations the streamer is trampling transgender rights and profiting from hate speech. Thousands of Sudanese protesters gather outside the presidential palace in central Khartoum to demand the dissolution of the embattled transitional government. An anti-government sit-in enters its fifth day. And Cristiano Ronaldo scores a late winner for the second Champions League game in a row as Manchester United come back from 2-0 down for a last gasp victory over Italians Atalanta at Old Trafford.
Ronaldo rises and Manchester United rise from 2-0 down.
India's mega vaccination drive marks yet another milestone. 1 billion vaccines administered across the nation. We told you how it all began.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the world's biggest vaccination drive.
How we marked one milestone after another.
India will have nearly 120 million doses in June.
Catch all the latest updates on India's vaccine journey.
Biggest vaccination drive in the world, India today administered 1 billion vaccine doses.
India's mega vaccination drive. WION, continuing coverage.
It is a big day for India's vaccination drive. 9 months after launching the biggest vaccination programme in the world, India's reached 1 billion doses administered. This is India's live vaccination tracker. We are well over 1 billion now, as you can see. The country is marking the milestone in a number of ways. The national flag is being unfurled at Red Fort in the capital. Monuments across the country are being lit up and the achievements being announced at bus stops and villages. Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated the country and said that India has scripted history. He's visited a government hospital in New Delhi and paid tribute to all the doctors, nurses and others who played their part.
नई दिल्ली में उसके एक वैक्सीनेशन सेंटर पर पहुंचे थे और वहां पर उन्होंने और किस तरह से इसमें इजाफा किया जा सकता है इसकी भी जानकारी ली।
आज 21 अक्टूबर 2021 का ये दिन इतिहास में दर्ज हो गया है। भारत ने अब से कुछ दूर पहले ही 100 करोड़ वैक्सीन डोज का आंकड़ा पार कर लिया है। मैं देश की वैक्सीन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनियां, वैक्सीन ट्रांसपोर्टेशन में जुड़े कर्मयोगियां, वैक्सीन लगाने में जुटे हेल्थ सेक्टर के प्रोफेशनल्स, सभी का खुले मन से, हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं.
The World Health Organization is congratulating India for its efforts to protect vulnerable groups from COVID and for achieving vaccine equity targets. The country faced supply bottlenecks, storage challenges and some vaccine hesitancy in the initial period. India reaches 1 billion in just around 275 days. The first vaccine dose in India was administered on January the 16th. It took 85 days to touch the 100 million mark, and India crossed the 500 million level on August the 6th. 74% of India's adult population has received at least one dose. 31% are fully vaccinated. But there is still a long way to go. India is aiming to fully vaccinate its entire adult population by the end of this year. So an additional 900 million doses would have to be administered by the 31st of December. And for more, we can talk live to WION's principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who is joining us from New Delhi. And Siddhant, a major milestone, no doubt, but that target of vaccinating the entire adult population by the end of this year, is that achievable on the current trajectory?
Well, if we go by the government optimism and estimates, they of course would like to make sure that this is achievable. But if we look at the meaning of this mark being breached, the threshold, the psychological mark being breached, is a positive news not only for India but for the world as well, because it looks like that a good number of human population is heading towards vaccination, and it also reduces the vaccination hesitancy, because if 1 billion people can do so, then the entire world can do so. But largely, if you look at the international aspect to the entire development, we know that global leaders are congratulating the Israeli leadership, the Bhutanese leadership, the Maldivian leadership have congratulated India for it, and it also gave boost to India's vaccine export. It was suspended, we know, when India was hit by the devastating second wave of COVID crisis in April, but it has been restarted, the vaccine export. Countries like Iran has been given vaccine. Countries like Nepal, Bangladesh are on the anvil. But largely, what events the Indian government is doing, as enumerated, one thing I can point out, if you are in the city of Delhi, you can see billboards across the national capital talking about this threshold being breached, and of course announcements at various transportation hubs, including the railway station.
And looking even further ahead, Siddhant, I mean, some countries are already rolling out booster jabs because of concerns about vaccine effectiveness potentially waning a bit after 6 months or so. Is it too early to start talking about booster jabs in India? What is the plan for that?
Well, when it comes to the booster jabs, yes, it is too early in a sense that the Indian government right now is focusing on making sure that the entire adult population is vaccinated. That is the big target in front of the Indian government. Yes, booster doses also come, but also remember that before that, it is the vaccination of the children. That is the big focus. We know things are going on, but there has to be a full-fledged rollout, and that is much more delicate thing. But when it comes to India, we know logistics is something we are talking in billions, and it is something of a mammoth task, not only here in the national capital Delhi, but also the far-flung areas of the country, border areas of the country, the deserts, Himalayas, coastal areas. We're talking about a continent that needs to be vaccinated, and that is why India achieving this milestone is a very, very positive news.
And Siddhant, just briefly, tell us about the economic impact of India moving ahead with its vaccination program so quickly.
Of course, there is an economic aspect in terms of the government spending a lot of money in vaccination, the logistics, and of course making sure that India produces more vaccines. But it is also beneficial for India in long term, in a sense that India is already a pharma hub. It is already known as the capital of pharmaceutical capital, and it helps in a natural progression for India to take a lead when it comes to medicines, when it comes to medical tourism, in which, of course, India is well known.
Siddhant, thank you very much indeed. Siddhant Sibal reporting live for us. China, meanwhile, is witnessing a sudden surge in COVID-19 cases. The country's logged a fifth straight day of new infections, and the latest resurgence in China comes just days after the country contained two separate Delta outbreaks in its northeastern and coastal provinces. The rise in cases comes even though Beijing has maintained a relentless zero COVID approach with strict border closures. The latest flare-up is linked to an elderly couple who were part of a group of tourists that started a road trip through China's northwestern provinces. According to reports, there were few cases that were reported in Gansu province after the couple flew to Xi'an, Gansu province, and Inner Mongolia. Meanwhile, the fresh breakout of COVID cases has spread, it appears, to the capital city of Beijing. Beijing is busy gearing up to host the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in February. Also, two separate cases have been reported in the south and southwest of China. Almost half of the 26 local cases that have been found were close contacts of the elderly couple who tested positive during their tour. So China is cancelling hundreds of flights, closing schools and ramping up mass testing. Some regions, including Lanzhou, have told residents not to leave unless necessary, and further claiming that a negative COVID-19 test is mandatory to leave the region as well. According to China's National Health Commission, a total of 13 domestic cases were reported in the last 24 hours. Russia also struggling against a new surge in COVID-19 cases. President Vladimir Putin has approved a proposal for a week-long workplace shutdown. Non-working days in Russia will begin from October the 30th to November the 7th. Russia reported 34,000 cases and over 1,000 deaths in the last 24 hours.
The Russian government is putting strict measures in place to combat a spike in COVID-19 cases and deaths. President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday approved a proposal for a week-long workplace shutdown at the start of November. Putin said the non-working days from October 30th to November 7th, during which people would continue to receive salaries, could start or stop at different times for certain regions. This comes as coronavirus-related deaths across Russia hit another daily record at 1,028, with over 34,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. On Tuesday, Moscow's mayor announced 4 months of stay-at-home measures for unvaccinated people over the age of 60. In the face of a strained healthcare system, authorities are stressing urgency in their efforts to slow the spread of the virus and confront public reluctance to get inoculated with the Russian-made vaccine.
The vaccine reduces for real the risk of infection or severe complications after the disease, the death risk. That's why I certainly support the government's proposal. I want to draw regional heads' attention to the need to increase the number of vaccinations. And of course, I call on all our citizens to get vaccinated.
Russia began a revaccination campaign in July, one of the first countries to do so. Even so, Putin himself has yet to receive a booster shot, according to the Kremlin.
After 16 months of negotiations, the United Kingdom and New Zealand have signed a new comprehensive free trade deal in principle. Though the British government is calling the deal groundbreaking, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is being accused here in the UK of selling out Britain's farmers. As part of the deal, tariffs as high as 10% are set to be removed on a range of UK goods and clothes, from clothes and ships to bulldozers. And the price of New Zealand-produced products like wine, manuka honey and kiwis are also set to go down. Trade between the two countries is currently worth $3.2 billion. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said it was one of the best deals ever and crucial for economic recovery.
The United Kingdom and New Zealand are great friends, close partners and fierce sporting rivals, of course. The historical connections that bind us run deep. This world-leading free trade agreement we are now on the verge of concluding will lay the foundations for even stronger connections in the future. This serves New Zealand well as we reconnect, rebuild and recover from COVID-19.
For Britain, the deal comes after recent post-Brexit partnerships with Japan and Australia. It's all in line with Boris Johnson's plan to shift the UK's focus towards the Indo-Pacific region. For New Zealand, it's a shift away from Beijing, which it has been heavily reliant on for trade. The deal is expected to boost New Zealand's GDP by $970 million, but some estimates say it won't bring any extra growth to the UK's economy. But the government insists it will bring greater opportunity and shows that Britain is focused on global Britain after leaving the European Union. But there has been some criticism in the UK. British farmers' representatives are saying they will struggle to compete against New Zealand's meat and dairy farms. Netflix employees are storming out of their own offices in protest. On October the 5th, the streaming company launched a special show with American comedian Dave Chappelle. The release has brought scathing criticism from some viewers and now even some of the company's own employees. The show, named The Closer, is being branded by critics as transphobic. Around 100 people gathered outside the studio complex in Los Angeles, claiming that this kind of content can fuel future violence and even killings.
Of our pain. You're laughing put into their life, being forced into sex work, being forced to not have.
I think that his jokes were very transphobic. I'm very disappointed in a lot of our cis-queer community that did not find what Dave Chappelle said problematic. Honestly, I'm just tired of the whole trans experience having to be the variable for these networks to use to really drive in money and to drive in ratings while our trans community is hurting.
His jokes! I'm in charge of the protest now! I'm in charge!
Trans lives matter! Trans lives matter! Trans lives matter! Trans lives matter! Trans lives matter!
Protesters say they are holding Netflix accountable for providing a platform to a show that they say laughs at the expense of the trans community. The streaming company has been urged to repair its relationships with staff and audiences.
I thought it was important to shift the focus to the people that signed the check, because Dave Chappelle doesn't sign his own checks, Netflix does. And so if we have companies like Netflix who aren't listening to their employees, who are forcing their employees to participate in their own oppression, that's unacceptable.
Most, which is Netflix's official LGBTQ group, has tweeted to say that it can't always control the content that the platform puts out. That hints at an alienation from the company and the ideologies presented in the show. In support of the protests, the group also tweeted, "Be right back, we are walking out." Netflix has refused so far to take down the special, saying it supports the creative freedom of its artists, even when the material is controversial. The comedian Chappelle has laughed off the backlash as well, slamming internet's cancel culture. Some people have gathered in support of the show, claiming that jokes and comedy are central to the American experience and freedom of speech. Netflix has been mired in a series of controversies recently. Employees and viewers have accused the platform of propagating hate speech against marginalised groups. They're demanding clear disclaimers with content like Dave Chappelle's show. The company's been urged to hire trans and non-binary people for executive roles and to create a fund to support the talent of these groups.
Trans lives matter. 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 Trans lives matter.
In the Red Cross hospital in Kabul, former Taliban fighters who spent years battling Western and local forces and the former Afghan army soldiers who were battered by the Taliban takeover are standing next to each other. Injured soldiers from both sides have survived years of fierce fighting. Many are being treated at this clinic, some are receiving prosthetic limbs.
There's a place in Afghanistan where former enemies stand side by side, confronting their wounds. Taliban fighters and soldiers in what was once the Afghan National Army, now being fitted with prosthetic limbs and other treatments. This is the International Red Cross Hospital in Kabul. It's where you'll find Mohammed Ishaq, standing with those he defeated.
My name is Mohammed Ishaq, from Helmand Province, Marja district. For years we fought against the infidels and we defeated them, and I was injured. I fought for about 8 years against the infidels, and finally we've defeated them. I came here to the Red Cross Hospital. They make hands and legs for people who need hands and legs. They help all people in need. Whatever the people need, they provide.
Nearby is Mohammed Tawfiq, who was once a soldier before he was paralyzed from the waist down, the only survivor of an ambush. There's no victory for men like him to help with the healing, but he wants to put the war behind him.
It isn't just me. All the people of Afghanistan are tired of war. What we want, whatever government or authority is in power, we'll accept it as long as we're not harassed and bothered in a free environment where people are allowed to live according to their own will.
Well, before when with the previous regime, there were Taliban coming here, but very few and secretly. Now they come very openly, so we have many every day, 10, 15, they come for a different reason. They are disabled themselves, so we help them like we help everybody.
That's Alberto Cairo, the Italian head of the orthopedic program here. He's been involved with Afghanistan for 3 decades.
The Taliban themselves, they ask the ICRC to keep working in the same way, men and women working in the same way. So now we have all the staff present like before.
There are women who work here too. Unlike many in Afghanistan who were forced from their jobs by the Taliban, the Red Cross women can still work. With Afghanistan in such a deep economic crisis and its healthcare system in disarray, the Red Cross is one of the few entities that can provide services like this for Ishaq, for Tawfiq, and the many, many like them.
For almost a year now, the Ethiopian and Tigray forces have been indulged in a bloody conflict that shows no signs of abating. On Wednesday, the Ethiopian government said it carried out airstrikes within hours on the Tigray region, 2 airstrikes. The first strike hit Mekelle and the second hit Agbe in Tembern region. Tigray forces claim the strikes targeted civilians. The government says it hit a military training centre belonging to rebel forces. The conflict has killed thousands and displaced more than 2 million people already.
Ethiopia launched its 3rd airstrike in a week on the capital of Tigray on Wednesday, as it steps up its campaign to try and weaken forces loyal to the northern region's ruling party. Tigray Television, which is controlled by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, said the strike hit the city centre in Mekelle. Video obtained and verified by Reuters shows plumes of smoke billowing from the scene. 2 witnesses and a humanitarian source in Mekelle say the strike appeared to be aimed at a major factory complex. The Ethiopian government said it had targeted buildings where Tigrayan forces were repairing armaments. Fighting in the nearly year-old conflict is intensifying. Having recaptured Mekelle and much of Tigray several months ago, the TPLF pushed into the neighbouring Amhara and Afar regions in July. Last week, the TPLF said the government had started an offensive in Amhara. The military said it was inflicting heavy casualties and that the TPLF had opened war on all fronts.
That's all we have on today's WION Live broadcast from London. Thanks very much indeed, as ever, for being with us. I'm Ollie Barrett. For more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION World is One.
Many other. This is right, Arab.